A lot of great episodes coming your way, so be sure to check them out. Show us some love on all the different media platforms, YouTube, podcasts, all that good stuff.
Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes.
Absolutely.
Next few episodes are going to be showcasing our amazing North Point, Washington staff, as well as some of the alumni that have graduated from this facility, as well as North Point, Idaho, that live in the Washington State area.
Yeah, it's going to be a real good time,
guys. Welcome to No Way But North, where we talk about the miracles of recovery and the tools used to achieve them. My name is Cooper Lyons. My clean date is November 27th, 2010. Not as always.
You got clean when I was in college.
What years did you go to college?
I graduated in 2010.
You're fucking old. You still look good, though.
No, thank you. Yeah. Just look better with this beard. I just need a little salt and pepper in the beard, and then I'm beyond like another status.
Don't rush it, because once you go salt and pepper, you can't go back either.
I don't want to.
You never know.
I look more distinguished.
But you might like the young look too. You're a pretty youthful guy.
Oh, thank you.
Not as always, I'm joined by Big John Meldrum. He's still up here with me in Seattle at our Washington facility.
Stuck with you.
Yep. Guys, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe button to make sure he keeps sticking with me so the show keeps going and we keep passing along a message of recovery and tools to achieve them. And once again, we are joined by Brandon. Brandon, thanks for being here, man. Taking 2 hours out of your Saturday. We film these episodes back to back, so we really appreciate you sitting in the same chair with the same microphone in your face.
I don't.
It's an honor, man.
After the last one where I feel obligated to just say yes. Like, he'll say yes when it has to do with anything in recovery. Like, I don't even feel bad about wasting 2 hours. Because he said last time, people ask him to do stuff, and he's like,
Oh,
I'll do it.
Yeah, 2 hours isn't that big a deal versus like a 6-month commitment.
No, it's not that bad.
Wait, you're not going to get in trouble with your wife for being here?
No.
Okay.
Did you get in trouble when
I've
you
learned
came
to, clear my schedule with my wife. Like, I don't just agree to things without
You call her.
communicating.
You're like,
I've
hold on.
learned some communication skills as a result of being in recovery.
So,
I mean, that's
important.
a good thing.
Yeah.
It's like,
very important.
It's like, no, hold on. Let me text my wife real quick. Let me just give her a heads up. I'm about to say yes.
Yeah. No.
All right, guys. I mean, first of all, good husband right there. Good for you. So, before we move on, if you guys didn't catch Brandon's description in the last episode, he's extremely active in 12 Steps, extremely active in advocacy for recovery community in Washington State, Seattle more specifically. Puyallup more specifically, or Seattle?
Seattle, Tacoma area.
Yeah.
That's statewide.
Fair enough.
I go all over.
Do you ever come to Idaho and do any advocacy or anything like that?
No, I pretty much work the Washington area.
Okay.
So we're gonna actually get involved and kind of talk about the opioid epidemic, which I'm amazed we haven't dived into yet on this show. But
We have not.
so I'm really looking forward to that, talking about some community stuff. But as always, we got a quote, and I really like this one. Unfortunately, it's unknown because
I don't know who did it.
Yeah, I couldn't find it either. But it's, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I let you go first last time, but we're going to go over to Brandon so they don't have to read it back to back twice in a row.
So what I've learned in this process of reaching out to the community was that I can't do this stuff alone, right? That I need to get more community involvement. That's really important. And if I want to succeed in this and to get my voice heard, not just get my voice heard, but to make a change, I need some more involvement. From the community also. And so that's what I strive to do. It's I try to involve the community into recovery. And because I want to make recovery the epidemic. Just like my hat says, like my shirt says.
I was going to say, we got to point those out.
That's what I want, right? I want to end the stigma of addiction. And so I try to do it with other people and not alone.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can't have recovery alone. It's just, right? It's literally what's an antonym? What's the opposite of a word?
I barely passed college.
Antithesis.
Antithesis.
Makes me sound smart. But yeah, and you can't when I was in recovery, I isolated and I was alone and I didn't talk to anybody and I did everything I could to avoid human interaction. So I didn't really go fast but I couldn't do it alone.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to actually make a difference in not only, my life, but also others around me and a community, I have to, first of all, have that community. And to go be able to survive, right? As a person in recovery, to be able to survive and continue to be a normal fucking person, I have to have a community around me, even if that's just like 3 people. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
How am I supposed to follow that up? Like, he hit it spot on.
Gotta try.
That's it?
He's not making. No, he's not making.
He's speechless? That's it?
No, he has to read it twice. It's like a ritual now.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Why'd you read it so fast?
Unknown. Wait. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Just that whole idea of like camaraderie, giving back. Like, I feel like we see it a lot. Yeah, the service work, stuff like that. We see it a lot. Especially at North Point, like when we're starting to develop like discharge plans and stuff like that. And people have like this really poor discharge plan. We see it all the time. And they're like, yeah, I'll just hit some meetings. I'll just do that, maybe get a sponsor. And then like a month later, they're back in treatment.
Maybe I'll do it.
Maybe I'll do it. Like that whole, like going back to that whole like ambivalence. Like maybe I'll do it. Maybe I won't. I don't know. But like the people that do what's recommended, they do the outpatient, they do, 12-step, they do the 90-90 sponsorship, they do all that stuff because they have that strong peer support. Like, they make the distance.
Yeah, no, I just reworded what he'd said, but that's all right.
Well, I had to, man.
Yeah.
Damn. Like I said, like, how am I supposed to follow up my guy over here?
Yeah.
All right, guys. So like we talked about, Brandon's super involved in building community and kind of ending the stigma addiction, like you said. So we want to talk about, as somebody that's in long-term recovery, what's your perspective on the opioid epidemic and the way out of the opioid epidemic? And I hate saying opioid epidemic because it's an addiction epidemic. Right before the opioid epidemic, there was the meth problem. Right before that, there was,
Cocaine.
Cocaine
And crack.
It's like
They're all going to make their rounds.
Yeah.
They're all going to keep going.
And we're constantly in an alcohol epidemic that nobody ever talks about.
Well, I would say the big epidemic that we're in now is like this idea of marijuana. Like,
that's next.
As it's starting to get more legalized and as it's becoming more, or
Acceptable.
people are becoming becoming desensitized to the idea of like cannabis or marijuana being, a harmful substance. Like, we're seeing so many people come through North Point and Ashwood. Back when I started, I was like, okay, like marijuana, like, but like now that I'm seeing it firsthand basis, you're seeing, kids coming in with like psychosis, like, hardcore developed psychosis from.
Well, marijuana 20 years ago is different than marijuana today.
I mean, absolutely. Well,
it's a completely different thing. And so we don't know what the long-term effects of
20 years ago, like nobody was talking about sativa and indica and all this other stuff and like all these, different names for, it's
well,
nuts.
the THC count, it was like 10% versus like 90%.
Yeah, it's
so
ridiculous.
It's a completely different drug, and we don't know what the long-term effects are.
Yeah, 100%.
So anyway, we're just going to I want to get your perspective on, the opioid epidemic, the drug epidemic, why it's a problem in our culture, and kind of like what's the solution. So just starting with like, what exactly is the problem, right? Obviously, people are using drugs. Like, that's not a good thing. Right. But, like, what in your opinion, is, like, the core of the problem?
Well, I think, obviously, like, Big Pharma started this huge problem with the opioid epidemic and getting people addicted, and then people turned to street drugs, obviously, right? Because we got wise that we created this problem, and now we're going to cut it off cold turkey. Well, now the cartels are making all the money off of it, and we're killing all these people. What I know is that every 3 weeks, 3,000 people die. Like, that's an outrageous number. Right, and that's people. Across the board, right, with all addiction, right, but mostly with the opiates.
Yeah. And it's young people. It's not like 80-year-olds.
Yeah, like it's horrible, right? Like, I watched my boss have to go to a funeral this week, and it was the third high schooler to die of a fentanyl overdose from buying fake pills, and it was the third one this last week. Right, like it's in our schools now, and it's become a major problem, and I don't know what the way out is, and I don't.
Well, unfortunately, like when people are dying like that, it just becomes that much more popular because they're like, damn, that must have been some good shit.
Yeah.
Right. And so like
Some real addict thinking.
well, no,
that's the way
it's
it
crazy. I was watching this documentary and I think it was in Ohio, and it was the cartel takes a lot of drugs there because of the intersections for the interstates because they cross, and so like this town is just plagued. Like people were like they were walking down, there's just needles everywhere. But like they're like this idea of fentanyl, they lose 25 people a week to fentanyl overdoses in their county because people are coming from out of state because it's so flushed that typically in another state you might spend $75, you can get it there for 20.
Yeah.
And it's just being cut. Like, once again, the idea that this was made for a purpose, us as a society found a way to abuse it.
Yeah.
And like that's the hard part about it.
Well, and that's kind of what I was talking about too, is like, yes, Big Pharma, they played a giant role in it, right? Terrible marketing practices. They lied about the addictive properties, all of that stuff. But it's also becoming, like we talked about, we've done this with everything, right? Cocaine, alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana. What, like, is it isolation? Is it bullying? Like, I don't know either. I'm not expecting you to know the answer. But like, there has to be something within like our culture or our society that pushes these things because there's always an epidemic.
What I do know is that they've came a long way with studies. Like I was just reading the other day about this ACEs study. And what the ACEs study is the Adverse Childhood Effects study, right? And so they can ask you 10 questions based on your childhood. And they can pretty much tell you whether or not you're going to be an addict or whether you're going to kill yourself just by the statistics of your childhood traumas. And your childhood traumas can be anything just as much as like physical abuse to emotional abuse, but your parents getting divorced, right? Like what sort of abandonments did you have in your life? And what they know is if you've had 4 or more, you are like 10 times more likely to become an addict. If you've had 6 or more, you're 800 times more likely to kill yourself before the age of 30. Wow. Like that is staggering numbers, right? Like those are things that, and like they're not hard questions to ask, but there's a few schools now that like they're getting them into school so that they can try to get kids when they're young to teach them about trauma education, but not only that, but get the help that they need. So maybe they don't have to go to these outlets that we had to find.
Yeah.
Right? Well, and that was my next question was like, do they have statistics on if there's early intervention on those people that do answer to 4 or more or 6 or more? But it doesn't sound like it. It doesn't sound like it's widespread enough for them to have done
I don't know.
Studies
Yet.
I think just based off of society in general and how much we've moved forward with like social media and things like this, like it's just kids are becoming more educated on behaviors and addiction and things that like us 10 to 15 20 years ago would have been like I would have had no idea. Like I would have no like when I was in high school I would have no idea where to get heroin or where to even like consider getting cocaine or stuff like that. You'd go to a party and somebody might have weed and you'd be like,
that's a bad kid.
Wow, he's got it. Like that's the guy.
Yeah.
Right. But like nowadays, it's like it's so open. We have 18-year-old kids talking about like, oh yeah, I was on the black market and I had like all these pills delivered to my house, and I'm like, what? Like that's a thing? Like you can do that? And it's just, I think that's become, and like I said, with this idea, like when people are dying, like that means the shit's too strong. And so an addict's mind is going to be like, well, if it's that strong, then it must be that good.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think we need to stop doing? Whether that's as an individual, as a society, as a industry with addiction treatment, is there anything that you think that we could focus on and stop doing?
Well, I think promoting recovery in the community is a big way to do it, right? Like all the media attention is always on the negative, right? But what I know is there's 23 million people living in recovery across this nation, and most of them are anonymous, and that's okay, right? But there's a large group that are not anonymous, and we need to promote recovery in the community, right? Like we have such a mass population struggling from addiction. Like how can we put it out there so people know where to go for help if people aren't out there in the open and openly talking about it, right? Like I want it to be roundtable discussion at a dinner table, right? Like, I don't want it to be this thing that, like, we don't talk about Uncle John because he's got mental health problems or addiction disorders. Like, we don't talk about that and just don't bring out alcohol around him because he has a problem. Like, no, let's talk about what happened, how he got help, and the things he's doing to get through it now. So that way, when you see people going through it, that you know you can go to him for help and how he got through it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's make it a positive, and that's what we're not seeing in today's media coverage, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's something I'm trying to change. I want to promote recovery.
Yeah.
I think in the film Anonymous People, I know we were talking about that before there. I want to say back in the 80s, they got, I think it was like 50 or 60 like celebrities, like Buzz Aldrin, Dick Van Dyke, lots of political figures. All these people would come out and been like, listen, I'm in recovery. And it got, maybe it was in the early 90s, but it got overshadowed. Like this big thing they got together to try to push this movements and these policies on how to make it not so taboo. And it got overshadowed by like addiction and the crack epidemic. And like it was totally just flushed out.
Yeah.
And then like, and that's a hard thing is like recovery doesn't sell. Like in society, recovery doesn't sell. It should, but within the whole idea of social media, you're going to get more play on, somebody being strung out or Demi Lovato relapsing or something like that. You don't hear about like, oh, she just celebrated 6 months. It's like, oh, this person has fallen off the wagon again. Look how much of a train wreck they are. Like that sells. And that's what promotes it. But like there's still, though we have 23 million people in and there's a lot of people that, aren't anonymous anymore, there's still so many people that are like, I don't want people to know that I'm an addict. Because if people know I'm an addict, then I'm looked down upon because there's still that stigma that addicts are scum. Right?
Yep.
Well, and that's another thing. Like it's like talking with other people in my life that like new people that come into my life, whether they're friends or my current girlfriend. I've talked about addiction and she's totally fine with it, but she's never really experienced that, right? And she didn't really know how to act or behave around it. And so being able to provide that education for other personal people in my life, I think is a great place to start for an individual. And I don't know, I'm not a policy guy at all, but how do we try to raise that awareness that addiction's a disease and all that kind of stuff, and get rid of that stigma around addiction? And I don't know the answer. I don't know that you do, other than building that community.
Just a one fix.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't think there's one fix for this. Like, I know it's going to take a collaborative effort, and it's going to come in many different areas and many different waves. I know I continue to fight and try to do things to change the stigma of addiction. And like next week, I'm going to speak at a high school. Right?
Nice.
Like, that's pretty fucking cool. Like,
That's awesome.
To try to get a high school that's willing to let
Somebody like
people
you
in recovery come in and speak about addiction.
Which is so important.
But it's so hard to get in, right? Because schools don't want to let you in, because if they let you in, then they're saying they have a problem. They are single-handedly admitting that they have a drug problem in their school, and they don't want that. They don't want that attention.
It
It's
could possibly
negative.
be an issue.
And so it's hard. Like, we fight hard to try to get in, and we can't.
Yeah, I bet.
But I think the movement that you're in with like this whole like anonymous people type thing of like speaking out and actually being, so it's not so taboo. I mean, you look at mental health, for example. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, this idea that if you were depressed or anxious or suffered from bipolar or schizophrenia, like you didn't talk about it. Just like you said, like Uncle John, like we don't talk about what Uncle John is going through. So you have this whole idea since the early 2000s. There's been all these case studies and all this, articles and media covering mental health, and it's not as taboo. More people are speaking out on like suicide awareness and these things. And I think a large part of it is because people actually speak about it, right? Like we actually speak about it. Addiction is getting there, but it's still such a hot topic that people are like, when you start having things like the legalization of marijuana and the opioid crisis and all these other things, people are like, ugh. Because like heroin, meth, crack. These are such loaded words that people hear. And when you think of them, like the stereotype that is followed by what a heroin addict looks like, or somebody that is addicted to methamphetamine looks like, or an alcoholic or somebody like that. You think of like what the media has portrayed them to look like. So people are like, yeah, I don't want people to look at me like that, because they look at me, they're going to think I'm gross. Like that's the biggest complaint I hear about from people in treatment right now. I don't want people to look at me like I'm a disgusting individual because of like I was shooting up heroin.
Yeah.
Right? You're shooting up heroin, but like you're a dad and you own a house and you own your own business and you do these things. You struggle with substances. That doesn't make you the typical stereotype of, you know, homeless, nodding out in the middle of the street.
Even if you were, though, right? Like, how do you? My thing, the reason I like this topic with you, Brandon, is like you are all about building that community, and I think you're one of the North Point alumni with like the biggest, most solid recovery community built around them. And I always come back to that rat park. We always hear the rat study where the Skinner box, where the rat hits the drug or the lever and gets cocaine or morphine or whatever it was over and over and over again. They don't drink, they don't eat, and they die. And they redid that study, and they did the Skinner boxes, and they did Rat Park, and it was a huge, probably as big as this room. They had wheels, they had toys, they had other rats to play and sleep with, have sex with, and other different kinds of food and different kinds of stimulus and other rats, and like a fraction of them returned to using, and they got them addicted to morphine prior, and they like 90% of them were totally like stopped using the morphine.
They use their community.
Yeah. So how do we build a community that homeless person that's nodding off on the street can like still feel engaged and loved and like, oh my God, I'm worth it. Like, even if my family's rejected me, even if my job's rejected me, even if my school's rejected me, my community really does give a shit and they really want me to get better. I mean, that's a huge undertaking, right?
Yeah,
that's going to take so much resources to really do that right. But I think that comes down to the individual wanting to educate themselves, wanting to understand addiction, and being willing to kind of honestly go out of your way and help that person.
Yeah.
Whether it's buy them a sandwich or just say, hi, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything? Do you need socks?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Right. Like that's the number one thing with homeless, right? Like they want socks.
Yeah.
Obviously, like clean socks is like the best thing you can give them. Like they are on cloud nine. That and Uncrustables. Like they love Uncrustables, but who doesn't love Uncrustables?
That's true. I do love
right. Like I love them. Like, I put them in my lunch all the time.
Yeah, me too. I love them.
Just treating them like a decent fucking human being, right? Like they get treated like shit and scum all day. And so just treating someone with love and compassion and just asking them how they are and like, hey, like next time I see you, like what can I get you? Like those are life-changing points to those people, and they might not be ready for recovery then, and we can't just push recovery on people because we know it's a better way of life, right? But we can be there when they're ready, and so
and make sure
like
they know
that's the
that
hard
we're there
part about that, right? Like outreach is so hard.
Yeah, it's hard to be especially and I can't even imagine in a community like Seattle that's just massive. Yeah, like in Boise,
I don't know where to begin.
It's just by the sheer population and size of it, it's a huge undertaking. So I think it comes down to the individual taking responsibility to educate themselves, make themselves aware, and then people like us doing things like this, right? Hoping that this video and this conversation gets in front of as many people as possible,
right? So
that we can kind of spread that awareness, and maybe somebody that's listening will take that, like, they'll take those what we've talked about and they'll do some Googling or they'll do some research or they'll go watch the film Anonymous People and like maybe they'll just learn a little bit more.
Well, I think we want such a massive change that we look at, like we want to help so many people, but we have to look at the small successes that we get. And sometimes, and as unsatisfying as that is, you may have a room of 100 people, but you may only reach like 5 people. But like over the countless years of people struggling with substances or, struggling with whatever it is, those 5 people, like that's a success compared to what it would have been long ago.
Yeah.
And like, that's
you talked about focusing on the positive.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Yeah. So I think that's a lot of it, right? Like, I've worked with groups on making changes in my community, right? And we'll just pick like one thing, right? Like whether it be like last year we fought for recovery housing, right? Like that was a big thing. Like we wanted more recovery housing. There's a lot of bad homes out there. Like, and so we went down to Olympia and we advocated for this, and we created where they needed to allocate funds for it, and but also it had to meet a standard.
Yeah.
Right? Like it had to be good, fair quality homes, not just bad homes that were in it for the money. Right? Like there's a standard you have to meet. And if inpatients want to refer to an Oxford style living, which is like the predominant one in this area, right, is Oxford. If you want to refer to that in the coming years now with this new legislation, then you have to abide by this set of standards. But not only that, but we'll give you some money for funding to buy homes, and we will give money to patients coming out of treatment that don't have a job, because honestly, like, when we go into treatment, a lot of us don't have a job to come home to. So how can we afford to just come home, go live in sober living, and expect to pay for it? Yeah. Like that's not acceptable. Yeah. But what's even more not acceptable is spending the money to send someone to treatment and then having them go back to homelessness or back to that same hotel that they came from, where they were getting drugs. Like, I mean, that's not protecting your investment.
Regardless of what people think of like this whole, well, they just need to try harder. Like, there's just some people that just don't have resources. No matter what it is, they don't have the resources. They don't have things that can help them. You know, I hear that argument, you know, for people that are undereducated with the disease model of addiction. It's like, well, they should just stop using. Like, I don't understand why they can't just stop. I'm like, well, it's a little bit more than that. Well, if they just need to, you know, apply their mind and they should just go to school. I'm like, have you ever not had money? And then, like, what do you do to get money? If you don't have the resources, you don't have family members, you don't have a job, you don't have it. Like, what do? You go back to what you know, and usually that's criminalized, right? Selling dope, using dope, stealing, robbing, doing those things. Some people, and unfortunately more within the U.S. and in some like areas like Seattle, there's just people that don't have the resources to get out of the situation they are, and they just need just a little bit to get them started. And then they get that compassion and like, holy shit, somebody actually cares about me. Somebody wants to see me get better. Yeah. And that makes a whole difference. That could make or break somebody in early recovery.
100%. I don't really know what else to say. Anything you want to add to somebody that's listening, somebody that might be thinking about educating themselves on addiction, or somebody that might be struggling?
I definitely always want to add, like, there's a lot of small grassroots movements, organizations that are popping up across the state, right? Like, this is becoming a big up and growing thing, and we're not going anywhere. Like, we want our voices heard, and we want to make changes, and the only way that these changes are made is by people coming together and going down to Olympia and telling people what we need in our community, right? Because recovery laws are made every year, both for and against us, and they're made by people who might not know what addiction looks like, and they don't know how to get out of it, and but there's people that are fighting against us, right? And what it takes is people like us to go down and advocate for those things.
We have to advocate for ourselves.
What I know is it makes a huge difference. Like, last year we advocated on 3 major recovery laws, and what I know is they passed unanimously, all 3 of them, across the board, and became laws that year. Right. And like, I will continue to do that because it works. Me just sharing my story and going down and showing up and bringing my kids with me and showing these people that people do recover. Right. That it's not always just like this. Yeah. So get involved. If you don't know how to get involved, hit up Cooper to get my contact info. Like, I'm more than happy to give it out, and I will tell you how that I get involved with my local area and legislation and talking to senators and making my voice heard.
Yep. All I can say is that I'm glad we have people like you, man. I'm glad we have people like you fighting the good fight and doing those things and spreading awareness and advocating for people that can't necessarily advocate for themselves. Absolutely. We're really lucky to have you, and anybody that's joining you on that, we need more of. So we appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sir?
I got nothing.
All right.
Brandon killed it, bro.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. Please make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that share button. Helps us reach more people. It helps us help educate people. Share the miracles of recovery and the tools used to achieve them. This has been No Way North.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call 208-999-4064. The views and opinions expressed in No Way But North do not reflect those of North Point Recovery or any other institution or organization.